So, are you not sure how to return your athletes back to sprinting and cutting and returning to sport? You're unsure how to bridge that gap between the treadmills and all of a sudden, day one, we're cleared, we could return to sport, and we don't really know how to bridge that gap. I'm here to help explain to you my thought process, how we're going to take us day one from running and how every part of rehab bleeds into the next. That way, when we are clear to return to sport, we're not drinking through a fire hose that first day back that we're trying to do all this new skills. It's all skills that we've been implementing this entire part of rehab. Now we just get to add our stick or our ball or whatever that sporting implement is, and we go from there. Now, the first mistake I see when it comes to returning to run from an ACL injury is that we are just not strong enough to begin that process. Now, a lot of times this comes from maybe just not progressing our strength work enough in that front end of rehab. Again, maybe doing the right exercises, but we're maybe not progressing that load. We may be squatting perfect, no compensations, no anything. We're doing all the right sets and reps when it comes to straight leg raise and all those table exercises. But maybe we just got to the point where we're just afraid to push because we don't know how much we can get away with. So again, not pushing that intensity when it comes to lifting in the first half of rehab, that is huge. We need to make sure that our athletes get as strong as possible. That way they could confidently throw that leg into the ground and absorb all that force and spin off to the next one. If we play so cautious and cautious and cautious and we never up the intensity, and all of a sudden one day we're able to sprint and run and do all this stuff, but we never really ramped up that intensity. It's like we're drinking through a fire hose that day. So we need to gradually ramp up that intensity. This goes from our lifting to our running to our jumping. We never want to get to these points of rehab where we reach a new milestone and we just full send it. So we need to make sure that we not only start at an appropriate level for that athlete, but we're constantly checking in. We're constantly trying to progress this athlete. So again, you could do this by, I like to create weekly sheets. That way, every week I can make my notes and say, hey, we're shifting, make sure we shift from here, or hey, the 30-pound kettlebell looks good. Let's try to bump up. Again, making your notes, making sure that the athletes maybe have a checklist, right? Old school weightlifting sheets that we used to use as a grad assistant are great. Maybe you're at a place you can get maybe a team builder or a training app, and the athletes can figure it out on their phone. But again, finding ways where the athletes are constantly checking in and monitoring and making sure that they're progressing their weights. Now, that being said, we don't just want to progress for the sake of progressing. We don't want to make sure they're moving in wrong patterns. So if you progress, maybe they're crushing that 30-pound goblet squat, and maybe you think it's time to go to the 35. And now we get to the 35 and old habits start to come back up. They start to shift. Maybe they start to collapse. Maybe they lose their posture. Okay, maybe we go back to the 30s, but we mess with some tempo. We work with some eccentrics, some pauses. Again, that's another way to move the needle forward without necessarily sacrificing anything that we want to jeopardize. Now, the next biggest mistake I see when it comes to returning to run is really not having an understanding of the fundamentals that are going to be needed. So, what I mean by that is positions and the patterning of the legs. Now, again, as a strength coach, there was some point in my career where I had a light bulb moment. I remember I was at the private sector and we just conditioned kids. We would, if you needed someone to beat a 300-yard shuttle, my gym was the place to go. But when it came to getting athletes really faster, I don't necessarily think we excelled at that. And I remember when that gym ended up closing, going out of business for other reasons, I was on my own. I remember going back, reading a bunch of Derek Hansen, Ken Clarkson, be like, oh, there's a way we could actually teach speed the right way. So again, if you're unsure of the mechanics, those are two great resources. Les Spielman, that was another great resource. But understanding the basics of mechanics of stacking joint positions, the pattern of the leg are huge when it comes to teaching running. Now, you could work on these things without producing a ton of force, especially in that early stage rehab. We could just focus on those positions and the pattern of the leg. Then when we get to running, we're able to understand and again, cue those same positions, cue those same patterns. That way they have some sort of semblance of kind of what we want them to do. Now, the third and the last thing is not prioritizing speed. Now, what I mean by this is, again, I feel like if we get one of these protocols, or again, a lot of them are kind of geared just towards general ACL patients, not necessarily high end or high achieving athletes. So again, if I'm getting an athlete that maybe is a college baseball player, an athlete that is getting ready for the spring and their doctor's going to clear them at 6 months, we want to make sure that they're ready for the intensities and the speeds and the volumes that's going to happen. Then we need to make sure that we're hitting it in training in some form or fashion. So I want to take a speed-based approach. Again, this is popularized by Alan Murdoch. He has a lot of great research and a lot of great materials on the speed-based approach, and Bushendexler as well. I've kind of molded my approach after theirs, where I started with acceleration and went to our dribbles. I really love focusing on our dribble pattern at first. Again, to me, it prioritizes speed, it prioritizes stiffness and positioning, and we're able have our athletes move faster, sooner, which is a name of the game. From there, we're also able to do this because we're in the right positions. We're stacking our joints. We have the right pattern of our leg, and we're able to absorb this force faster. So, again, all things that we're going to see on the field. From there, it bleeds into acceleration work. Great, because when I get to acceleration work, to me, when I started with acceleration work, the hardest thing that we would see is that transition from accelerating to climbing to max velocity to slowing down. Now, our athletes are familiar with that upper body running position. So now it's push, 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 and hammer to that spot. So again, I love to use my dribble progression to start. It engages that patterning. We're able to also track the volume a lot better. If I run 10, 20, or 30-yard dribbles, I know the amount of contacts I should be hitting. We could track that week to week, make sure that we're tracking that volume, as opposed to just saying, hey, go on the treadmill for 30 minutes. Again, that 30-minute treadmill may be a ton of unsupported ground contacts that are beating up that knee. And one day we may be feeling great and we may be buzzing and get a lot of contacts. And one day we may be feeling slow and we may double or triple that amount. You want to make sure that as a coach, we're coaching, we're not cheerleading. I could watch that athlete perform that dribble. I could call them over, cue them the way I want to cue them, show them some video, make sure that we're understanding the importance of getting the positions, how to get them, and how to adjust to them. It's huge in the rehab process. We want to make sure that each day we come in, we are not sore, we're ready to go. We have the most productive sessions we can be. And that means that in the moment we're coaching, we're cueing, we have our eyes on positions and patterns and really diligent with kind of what we're looking at. Because again, to me, rehab, we should be constantly coaching and cueing and making sure that everything we're doing is kind of went through with a fine tooth comb. That way, we don't get any of these overuse or other lingering issues. Again, the other thing to me that's great with these dribbles and the acceleration and the build up progression that we have is it really eliminates any secondary issues, any hamstrings, calves, soft tissue injuries. Again, because the whole time you're perfecting that form, like we know if I start my dribble series and go to my tempos, what are some kind of high ticket issues I may see? I may see a lot of shin issues because we're casting out in front. I may see some hamstring because I'm whipping in the back or kicking that leg out in front. So again, understanding the importance of that upright stack position, having that front leg right tucked underneath my knee and whipping that underneath and getting to the next spot. That efficiency is going to eliminate those other back end injuries. Same thing when it comes to our acceleration work. Our ability to create these shapes, get in and out of these positions is huge for our long term development, especially when we think now coming into agility and change of direction and dodging. When it comes to dodging and all of these change of direction drills, we want our athletes to understand that my goal is to put my foot into the ground, sink my center of mass, and redirect that center of mass in the opposite direction. Hitting those acceleration positions, those straight lines from my shoulder to my hip to my back leg, and I want to scissor those legs and then climb and get into my position. Again, we can keep our athletes engaged by showing them a ton of video. I know myself, I'm a visual guy, so I crush Instagram. I have several folders kind of dedicated to these athletes. And again, I love just kind of taking the tripod, setting my phone on the side, calling our athletes aside and go, hey, here's where the position you are. Kind of staple this into your mind. Just feel this position. Here are the things that we want to feel. I could coach and cue you all day long, but at the end of the day, you have to feel the difference. One of my big analogies is like hitting a golf ball, hitting a baseball. When you hit the ground, whether it's acceleration or max velocity, in those stacked joint positions, it's just like hitting a home run. You don't feel anything. You hit that ball and it feels like you didn't do anything. And that's what we're looking for when it comes to our running. Again, we should be coaching and cueing and watching our rehab runs with a fine tooth comb. To me, the days of putting a kid on the treadmill and saying, we'll see you in 20 minutes so I can do my notes are over. We need to be for our athletes to get back to not only the level that they were at, but higher and not waste that year. I remember when I was an athlete as a kid, if we heard an athlete tore their ACL, we didn't know what was going to happen. When that kid started to practice again, I remember we had some teammates, it was almost like the whole practice stopped, right? The other thing about it is almost you would see a pro athlete come back from an ACL and you'd be like, he doesn't look the same. And in the back of your head, you're like, oh, well, they say it's going to take a year for them to get back. No, to me, the way sports performance and rehab has exploded, that shouldn't be the case anymore, especially now for our younger athletes. We should be able to bring that same level of care to our athletes of all levels. So, if you want to learn more on how to bring that high level of care to your athletes and your community, subscribe, follow us. We're going to keep giving out these tips week after week after week.